Okay, today I'm going to talk about the Four Noble Truths, Basic Buddhism 101. But we forget sometimes, and I think it's appropriate on occasion to talk about the basics, because that's really what's going to help us end our suffering. So the Buddha only talked about two things in an entire teaching career. He talked about why humans suffer, and he talked about how to end that suffering. And he spent a lot of time talking about humans suffering because a lot of humans are in denial that they're suffering. I can remember going to Paulus Ferdi's high school, which is really a nice high school, and they didn't really get it, the suffering thing, at the level I was hoping they would. They talked about they lost the football game on Friday, and it really made them feel uncomfortable with their team. And we should all be so lucky that that would be the biggest problem in our life. So the Buddha went in, and I think he started with, the reason we're suffering basically is because we're born. And because we're born, we have to get old, we have to get sick, and we have to die, and there's nothing we can do about it. And not only that, everything that we really like, cherish, and want to hold on to will be taken away from us. Impermanence. And the idea of success and failure is just an illusion. There's just living and dying. One of the things that I reflected on about suffering is that when we were born, we were interconnected directly to the universe around us. And as we started to mature and create an intellect, a self, and an ego, we started to become separate. And then we went to school and we had to learn the vocabulary. And that vocabulary was filled with words that would allow us to manipulate the world around us, but also be separate from it. So the bigger vocabulary you have, the more separate you are. People talk about ultimate reality. And a woman the other day said she figured out it was one. She said ultimate reality was one. So the only concept she could come up with for ultimate reality was one, which includes everything. And of course the Buddhist went into a different way. We said, it's not, we're not concerned with everything. We're concerned with nothing. That the universe is filled with nothing. And if you try to define everything and nothing, you get the same definition. So we just took the backdoor approach to ultimate reality. And someone the other day asked me, does everybody have the same ultimate reality? I thought that was the best question I've ever been asked. Does everybody have the same ultimate reality? And of course, if that would be the case, that would lead to the God concept, or the Hindu concept of the giant spaceship called soul, and all of us are heading in that direction. And I said to him, just sort of off the cuff, without thinking very long about it, that no, we don't have the same ultimate reality in our experience, because everything is in a constant state of change and flux. So your ultimate reality experience will be different from mine, not because of your intellect, but because of impermanence. Having said that, we suffer in many different ways, physically and emotionally. And the Buddha said, I came to the conclusion that the reason for all this suffering is desire, is craving, thirst that can't be quenched. This desire is like a carrot at the end of the stick, and we chase it, hoping to catch it one day and satisfy it. And yet no matter how many times anything is repeated, it's never ultimately satisfactory. You always think it could be just a little bit better the next time, and so you keep doing the same thing over and over again, which is the definition of insanity, and never ultimately satisfied. The Buddha said, I have found the answer, though. I have found the answer to that desire and that craving, the way to end it forever. And that would be nirvana. That's what I call the end of suffering, the end of all future rebirths, and the end of karma. I call it nirvana. And every human has the ability to achieve nirvana. Perhaps not in this lifetime, but in one of the many lifetimes we have as a human. Now, in some cases, I have heard that cats and dogs also can achieve nirvana. I have to agree that it is possible, but only as a human. So all the cats that we have in the backyard have heard the Buddhist chanting, have smelled the incense burning, have listened to the Dharma talks, and seeds have been planted. And one day all those cats will be reborn as a human being. We're hoping that they move in as a resident and pay rent. We'll have to see. Now the fourth truth, of course, is the most important truth. The fourth truth is the path leading to the end of suffering. The noble eightfold path. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And we can take those 8 path factors and put them into 3 categories: personal discipline, mental purification, and wisdom. In the first category of personal discipline, we find right speech, right action, right livelihood. There are 4 kinds of wrong speech that we need to avoid in order to have right speech. We need to avoid false speech, malicious speech, harsh speech, gossip, and idle chatter. Those are the 4 kinds of speech that prevent us from being skillful. There are 3 kinds of action we need to avoid in order to have skillful action. Killing, stealing, sexual misconduct are the 3 kinds of activity we need to avoid. Now, if you've been following the news today, one of the countries, North Korea, just detonated a hydrogen bomb, according to them. Reminds me of 1963 in the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's just really weird that people are still going in that direction. How many things can we kill with one item? Hydrogen bomb can do a really good job of killing. But is killing the way we want to go? Does killing enough people ever solve a problem? Does it ever really change the course and direction of a country or a state or a city? So I'm often fascinated myself with these sports conventions, like at the convention center. And they go in a fishing convention. And they have poles, and they have reels, and they have boats, and they have motors, and they have hats and all sorts of gear that you can buy. And all that stuff is designed so you can go out and kill fish. And when I look at advertisements and people on the pier fishing, they look so relaxed and happy. And their wife and they're there, and the children are there, and they're playing. And he catches one. He kills the fish, pulls it up. Everybody applauds. What a wonderful guy. Look at the skill he had in order to kill that fish. And I'm thinking the skillful guy is the one sitting on the pier without the fishing pole, appreciating the lake and the trees and the sunshine. That's the skillful guy. He doesn't need to kill to make his day better. He just needs to have maybe a cold soda, iced tea, and friends and family. So killing is something we're prone to do as humans, and we're really good at it. And we've been doing it ever since we started with tribes and having to defend our territory. And we continue. And ultimately, one day, we'll wake up and say, you know what? Maybe it's best not to kill. Maybe I should put as much energy into not killing as I do into killing. Maybe I should find a way to move the ants and the spiders and the mosquitoes and the flies from my space to their space, without having to take their life in the process. taking stuff that is not given. You know, lately we've had a lot of video on the news, local news, of people breaking into places and stealing stuff. ATMs, cash registers. And I'm thinking, what a way to make a living. You know, sometimes college and a good job is more stable than stealing. And you're really hurting a lot of people when you steal, because those people think they own the stuff that you're stealing. A lot of them have receipts that prove their ownership. A lot of them have business licenses that prove it's their business and their money in the cash register. Even though it's an illusion and none of us really own anything, we're just using all the stuff we think we own until somebody takes it or we can't find it or the new model comes out. It increases suffering. So the major reason for Buddhists not to take stuff, not to steal stuff, is because it increases suffering. Not because people own it. I had a car one time, 1975 Opel Manta, flag blue, 4 on the floor, audio cassette recorder. It was my Mercedes. And I would drive that little guy around and just be so happy, and I'd turn up the sound. And then one day, as I was getting ready to go to work, I went out to my car and one of the side windows was broken and somebody took my audio cassette player. And where it used to be, there was a hole in the dashboard. And I yelled at my car. I said, "Car, who owns you? Why did you let them take your cassette recorder? Who owns you, car?" And my car said back to me, "Nothing." There was complete silence. And I came to realize that really wasn't my car. I just thought it was. And that really wasn't my cassette player. I just thought it was. But for 2 weeks I suffered. I got another one through the insurance policy I had. They installed it, and within a week that too was stolen. And after that, I just left the hole in the dashboard. It was my reminder of impermanence every time I got into that car. Sexual misconduct. It should be really easy for a Buddhist to avoid sexual misconduct. The Buddha, according to Bhikkhu Bodhi, in his booklet, The Noble Eightfold Path, said there are 4 things we need to avoid. We need to avoid having sex with people who are married, having sex with people who are engaged, having sex with children, and having sex with people against their will. Those are the 4 things we need to avoid. And it should be a signal when you hear that the Buddha, before he was the Buddha, when he was Siddhartha, was a husband and a father, and realized that the building blocks of any community was based on the family unit. And we needed to respect the family and honor it. If you listen to TMZ or read People magazine, you understand those 4 are really hard to keep, especially if you're a celebrity. But we need to work on that, because it does create harmony with a bunch of people living together, some married and some not. And that's like the whole idea. Can we find harmony in living together? Right livelihood. Can you figure out a way to make a living and not increase suffering? So stealing's not good. A lawyer sometimes is good, sometimes is questionable. Politician, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's questionable. Garbage truck driver, always reducing suffering. So that may not be a bad way to make a living, and they have a union. So can we figure out how to make a living and decrease suffering rather than increase suffering? And as the Buddha might have said in his time, the best job I can think of is monk or nun. It doesn't pay well, but there are good karmic benefits. Now we come to meditation. This is the second category, mental purification. In that we find 3 of the path factors: right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. We find with right effort, it's nothing to do with the body, but everything to do with the mind. Right effort, to prevent unskillful thoughts from arising. to abandon unskillful thoughts once they have arisen, to develop skillful thoughts that have not yet arisen, and to maintain skillful thoughts that are already there. So now we need to define skillful and unskillful thoughts. Skillful thought, one that's based in generosity, compassion, and wisdom. Unskillful thought, one that's rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion. So with right effort, we need to constantly be aware of those 6 kinds of thoughts, those 2 categories, skillful and unskillful, and see what's going through our head at any moment. So, food for less, down the street. I'm in the ice cream aisle. I see a box of 12 ice cream sandwiches for $3. How can you pass that up? Well, after the 5th ice cream sandwich, you wished you had. So that was definitely a thought of greed that had arisen and motivated me into purchasing those 12 ice cream sandwiches. But then there are other times when you see a small animal, dog or cat, that's hungry and you feed them. That's a thought of generosity and compassion combined. So all day long we go through these series of thoughts, skillful and unskillful, and our job is to sort of pay attention. And we know that a thought has a beginning, and we know a thought has an end. So our job, if it's an unskillful thought, is to not act on it, but wait until it ends. Our job is to, if it's a skillful thought, to act on it right away before it goes away. Skillful, unskillful. 2 kinds of Buddhist meditation according to the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification. We have vipassana and samatha. We have insight and tranquility. There are 4 kinds of insight meditation and 40 kinds of samatha meditation or tranquility meditation. 40 in one, 4 in the other. The Buddha did both. The Buddha was taught how to do tranquility meditation by the yogis of India and surpassed every one of his teachers in technique and conclusion. The Buddha rediscovered insight meditation, vipassana. It had been lost to the world. Every Buddha had achieved their nirvana because of it, but it had been lost. But every Buddha rediscovers it, practices it, and teaches it. So in samatha meditation, there's something called the 4 jhanas, the 4 levels of tranquility. And these allow us to come to a state of one-pointedness. The first jhana has 5 characteristics: applied thought, sustained thought, happiness, bliss, and equanimity. The second jhana has 3 characteristics: happiness, bliss, and equanimity. It no longer has applied thought and sustained thought. The third jhana has 2 characteristics: happiness and equanimity. And the 4th jhana only has 1 characteristic: equanimity, perfect balance of mind. So this is how it might work if your object of meditation is the sensation of breath. You bring your attention to the tip of your nose or to your abdomen, and you hold it there. Applied thought and sustained thought. At the tip of the nose, you're a sentry. And what you're doing is you're following the breath out and in, the sensation of breath. Breath has a sensation if it exits your nose. And you might apply a concept to that, and you might use numbers. And you might say, every time I exhale, I'm going to say 1. Exhale again, I'm going to say 2, up to 10, down to 1, up to 10, down to 1. Ultimately, you're going to let go of that concept of counting and simply rest on the sensation of breath without including your intellect as a tether holding it to that sensation. You get rid of applied thought and sustained thought first, Then you have the sensation of physical pleasure, mental happiness, and equanimity. And you need to figure out how to let go of the attachment to the physical pleasure. You can't prevent the physical pleasure, but with physical pleasure comes attachment. With physical pain comes aversion. The job of the meditator is to get rid of the attachment and the aversion. When you are successful in getting rid of your attachment to the physical pleasure, it goes away, and now you're left with two, happiness and equanimity. There is also an attachment to happiness. We prefer that over sadness or unhappiness. And we need to let go of the attachment to that happiness. And when we figure out how to do that, we are left with perfect balance of mind. There's neither physical pain or physical pleasure. There's neither emotional happiness or emotional unhappiness. You're simply left with this wonderful sense of balance, which perhaps is similar to the mind state of nirvana. But in this case, it's very temporary. Because once you hear the gong, the intellect wakes up, everything sort of comes back to normal. All that happiness and sadness, all that pleasure and pain is right there again, and there's our attachment and our aversion. And the Buddha realized, even though it's a wonderful system, it doesn't lead to permanent peace. You're still a prisoner. And that's where vipassana comes in. So there are four kinds of insight meditation. Mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of sensations, mindfulness of the mind, and mindfulness of mental objects. We'll use sensations as our topic. There are three kinds of sensations. There are happy sensations or pleasant. There are unpleasant sensations, and there are neutral sensations. And the idea of the meditator, perhaps at a very beginning level, is to just simply note if the sensation is pleasant or unpleasant, and then seek another sensation. And note, is it pleasant or unpleasant? And you start at the tip of your toes and go to the top of your head, and you scan, looking for sensations and noting happy, unhappy, pleasant, unpleasant. Then, at the end of your scanning, you go into a state of rumination, reflection, contemplation. And you're seeking the three aspects of Buddhist wisdom in those sensations. The first aspect of Buddha's wisdom you're looking for is impermanence. Were all these sensations impermanent? Or did they seem to last with the same intensity for a long time? And upon reflection, you start to see that no, none of these sensations were permanent at all. Some seemed to get worse, some seemed to get better. Some seemed to go away for a while, but then they would come back. So you would say to yourself, yes, all sensations are impermanent. That's my experience. Then you would look at the world. Is there anything in the world that's not impermanent? Is there anything in the world that's not changing? And you'd think, and you'd reflect, and you come to realize that no, all things in the world, just like your sensations, are impermanent. And if I try to hold on to anything for any length of time, I'll be disappointed. I'll have great suffering because it changes. The second aspect of Buddhist wisdom you want to find in your sensations turns out to be dukkha, or suffering. Did every sensation have suffering attached to it? And you'd say, you know, a lot of them did. I've only been meditating for 2 weeks and all I found were negative sensations. The good ones hadn't started yet. If in fact you did find a good one, you would say to yourself, but that didn't seem like it was suffering. That seemed really good. It seemed like I had left suffering behind and found pleasure or happiness. But then you thought to yourself, you know, I realized that everything always changes, everything's impermanent, and so even if it's a good sensation, ultimately because of change and impermanence, it too will become unsatisfactory. And you go, wow, okay, so everything changes and everything is filled with suffering. Number 3, does anything have an original essence, independent? Is anything unconditional? And this is a tough one, because most people think that they exist at some level independently. And that feeling is necessary in order to work our way through this very complicated world. We need to be able to use all the levers and buttons we find along the way to manipulate the world and allow us to stay alive. So we're always thinking, and we're always separate from the world around us, so we can think about it. And that gives us a sense of individuality, a sense of personal space. It might even give us a sense of having a soul. So the Buddha, when asked about the soul, he was a little iffy on it. He said, well, you know, I find 2 problems with having a soul. The first problem I find is that people that think they have a soul think that they can maybe have an eternal soul, and that if they mess up in this lifetime, they can make up for it in the next lifetime. So eternal souls aren't necessarily good for personal accountability in this moment. Then there are the people who say, yeah, I don't have a soul, I don't believe in God, I'm a nihilist, I'm okay with it. Well, the problem with not having a soul is that there may be no personal accountability again. Because no matter what you do or how badly you do it, you're going to die and feed trees, and it really doesn't matter in the long run. So nihilism, eternalism, those are 2 big issues. And the Buddha said, I think the reality is somewhere in the middle. I think you might have a soul, but that's not who you are. And it's not eternal, because everything changes all the time. And there are some wonderful papers written on this subject if you are curious and want to go into greater depth. But I find it fascinating. So now we come to the personality. Do I have a personality? Well, no, it isn't your personality, but you do have a personality, and it was given to you because of your biology, your genetics. You have a human personality. We're the only animal that looks at the world in the way we do. And not only that, we can enhance the way we look at the world through education. We can have a giant intellect and understand the beginning and the end of the universe, and even mathematically prove it to exist or not exist. It's an amazing mechanism that we have, but it's not who we are. Again, it's not who we are. It's what we use to become somebody, to live in a world where you have to be somebody. It's very hard to be nobody in this world, because you have to be so many things in so many different ways. Though one of my favorite quotes is from Ram Dass, and Ram Dass says, you know, in the beginning we're all in somebody training. Our parents are telling us what to do, our school is telling us what to do, our boss is telling us what to do. We're becoming somebody in so many different ways. But when we get to be in the 40s and our 50s, we need to go into nobody training. We need to sort of let go of all the stuff that made us somebody, and we need to embrace the stuff that makes us nobody. And somebody asked Ram Dass, well, why would that be important to be nobody? And he says, because only nobody dies well. So, okay, you're too young to appreciate that. So, this self, this personality is a wonderful tool, and we're so lucky to have it, but it's a terrible master because it's only concerned about us. And at some point in our spiritual progress, we go from us to them. They become just as important and ultimately more important than we are, because we've seen how all things are interconnected and interdependent. And whatever I do for me, I do for them. Whatever I do for them, I do for me. It can't be separated. That comes later in your practice. Now we have 2 kinds of Buddhist wisdom: right view, right intention. According to Bhikkhu Bodhi's book, The Noble Eightfold Path, right view is concerned with understanding the Eightfold Path at a relative and ultimate level. And right intention is having the intention of generosity, compassion, loving kindness. And if those are our intentions, then our speech and action will manifest skillfully in the world, and we will reduce our suffering and the suffering of others. So the Eightfold Path is a remarkable statement. Difficult to practice. The benefits may not be felt completely in this lifetime, but be assured if you are practicing the Eightfold Path, life is getting better rather than worse. So having said all of that in less than 45 minutes, does anybody have any questions or comments about what I've said? Or how I said it? Or would you like some time just to absorb it? Okay, good. Yes?
With the sort of like recognition that life is suffering, sometimes this sort of like nihilism develops. Mm-hmm. How do we prevent that from occurring?
Exactly. Well, that's only the first part.
Right, there's three.
Well, there's two parts. Life is suffering, and there's an end to suffering.
Yeah.
And so the nihilism comes when you forget there's an end to suffering. So you're looking at your life and you're going, oh, this is terrible, you know. But rather than practicing the Eightfold Path, you're having a couple beers thinking it's going to get better. And it doesn't. It never gets better. Your life will never get better. It only gets more complicated. There's only more things to do and less things to do it with. Aging process is a real bummer. But having said that, the idea in Buddhism is we don't need more stuff to suffer less. We need less stuff to suffer less. We need to be less of the person we think we are in order to suffer less. So simplicity is a wonderful direction to go in. You know, in our youth, we're into accumulation. The latest, the biggest, the best. But in our elder years, we find them to be, you know, distractions. And not worthy of occupying our time or space with. You've got other things to do, more important things to think about. So we let those go, you know, and when you have less stuff, there's less worries, less insurance, less feeling of being violated because you've got hardly anything to take. If somebody came through the door and said, I'm taking all the really valuable stuff in this room, we'd say, well, if you can find it, please, you know. There's nothing valuable here. It represents value, but in itself it's not value. So yeah, so the nihilists only get stuck at part one. Thank you. Yes, let me get...
Thank you for your talk. Can you elaborate just a little bit more on how we're connected to others? I heard you say that the problem with our view of the self, right? Harsh taskmaster, kind of makes us think only of ourselves, we're very self-centered, but you know, you get past that, you get connected to others. What you do for yourself, you do for others. What you do for others, you do for yourself. What's to stop someone from saying, well, I'll just keep focusing on myself because it'll trickle on down to others, right? So I can still be selfish, think that I'm connected to others or doing this for other people, but at the end, I'm just really doing everything for myself anyway. So that what is the right way to be connected to other people to make sure I don't become more of a selfish bastard with a Buddhist justification behind it now, because you know what I'm doing for myself, I'm doing it for everybody else.
Okay, I can't tell you the right way, but I'll give you some opinions about what I think about it. A good practice is to see how we're connected with others. What connects us? Well, we could start with the obvious. Suffering connects us. We all suffer together. Then you could say, well, you know what? Silence connects us. There's always silence in the midst of noise. It vibrates. And when we're in a place of silence, we're all connected through that silence. Another way. You could say, well, we're all connected because we live in LA. And so that's our connection to each other, and the people that come from San Jose aren't connected in the same way the people in LA are. We could also say, well, we're connected through politics. We all have personal opinions about politics. And we feel that if we get the right political system going, we'll all suffer less and have a better life. So some of us are concerned more, and some of us are concerned less about the politics of our life. Then we have the religion of our life. You might say, well, all those Buddhists are connected because they're Buddhists. But I have found that that's not necessarily the case. I have found between the Mahayana and the Theravada think they're better than the Mahayana, and the Mahayana think they're better than the Theravada, and the Vajrayana know that they're the best because they got the Dalai Lama. So you look at this and you go, but you know, you guys all had the same father, you just have different mothers. You know, and then you go, yeah. So humans tend to go in the direction of being separate rather than being connected. So our job is to, number one, see how we're connected, and to see how we can use that to the advantage of self and other. So I can't tell you how you're going to see your connections, but I can tell you it's a wonderful practice. Yes, Russell.
Yes, thank you for your talk. I had a practical question. You mentioned about the killing and stealing.
Yeah.
I can see, you know, for instance, myself as an individual, you know, trying to avoid those things. But then, most of our daily life, we allow other people to kill or steal for us. For instance, you know, I might not be fishing on the pier, but I might be eating the tuna sandwich, or I might be paying my taxes to allow the government to kill other people. Or to steal their lives, or I may be buying something cheaper, a piece of clothing that's made in China or Bangladesh or Vietnam or wherever, and it's actually, you know, a certain amount of exploitation, but I'm not doing it directly. So I'm wondering how responsible, I mean, as a Buddhist, you know, how responsible are we for, I mean, even though everything is interconnected, so how would you say it? How does our, how wide is our responsibility? You know, in those two cases, the killing and the stealing.
Yeah, I would say you got to start with you. And there are people that want to go out and change the world and make the place better. Oftentimes they commit suicide, literally, because they see there's no way of changing the direction of the world with the amount of time they have to do it. If you lived for 1,000 years, Russell, you might be able to do something about it. So, if you're a vegetarian, you don't eat meat, you don't wear leather shoes, blah, blah, blah. You're doing your part. But you can't tell other people to do that. Number one, they're going to hate you. And number two, they're going to misunderstand why you're telling them to do all that kind of stuff. So we have something called karma. And karma is the rule of cause and consequence. Unskillful activity leads to a painful consequence. So I would say accountability for you and let karma do its work.
But how about organized resistance and things like that?
Resistance? You mean like the political thing?
Yeah.
Well, these are just really difficult concepts that keep arising over the decades. You know, and in my day, I think I'm older than you are, you know, we had draft card burning. People burn their draft cards. Resistance. Some people went to Canada, you know. So there's always been resistance. And there always will be resistance because people don't necessarily like change or the kind of change that's happening. They like change if they think it's good. They hate change if they think it's bad. So there's this problem that we have as humans that we think we know how it's supposed to be. We think we know how it could be. And if only enough people felt the way we do, it could be that way. But I'm not sure how many people you need to change the course of history. 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion. To get all those people on the same page, it's really difficult. I would say next to impossible. So you're going to have incremental good changes and incremental bad changes, and then the culture collapses and something else takes its place, and there's incremental. So since the beginning of humankind, we have faced this problem and haven't found a satisfactory solution to it. But as a meditator, you see, as a meditator, we can say to ourselves, thinking, thinking. All the stuff we've talked about for the last 45 minutes, thinking, thinking. Okay, that's the best I can do. I say that a lot to myself. Thinking, thinking. Okay, having said all of that, a quick loving kindness meditation, and we'll call it a